All right, welcome to today's Explainer, where we're diving headfirst into a genuinely gruesome historical mystery that literally continues to shock true crime fans and history buffs all over the world. We're going to look at something so viscerally terrifying, it somehow managed to capture the morbid curiosity of humanity for over 2,000 years. Before we really get into the weeds here, I want you to just take a second and imagine the absolute worst way to die. Seriously, think about it. Is it fire? Maybe drowning? Well, brace yourselves, because the ancient world might just have you completely beat. We're going to examine a method that didn't rely on the quick, merciful strike of a blade, but rather on nature, time, and human biology all working together in literally the most agonizing way imaginable. Okay, so let's unpack this. Scaphism. The word itself actually comes from the Greek word scaphe, which just means boat or a hollowed vessel. In historical literature, it's widely regarded as the ultimate ancient torture. Sometimes people just call it the boats. Now, this was an alleged execution method attributed to ancient Persia. And the core components? They're surprisingly simple. We're talking 2 boats, milk, honey, and insects. But the way they combined these everyday things, well, that's what makes this so uniquely horrifying. Section 1. The ultimate ancient torture. Let's look at exactly how this terrifying procedure supposedly worked. We can basically break this agonizing procedure down into 4 completely horrifying steps, perfectly designed to maximize human suffering. First up, the condemned person was laid flat on their back inside a hollowed-out boat, and then another boat was fitted perfectly right on top of them, so only their head, hands, and feet were left sticking out. Next, they were forcefully fed a massive mixture of milk and honey, and if they refused, their eyes were pricked until they finally gave in. Then that same incredibly sticky mixture was smeared all over their exposed face and limbs. Step 3, they were just left out floating on a stagnant pond with their eyes forced open facing the blazing sun. And finally, step 4, the sweet mixture plus the inevitable human waste would attract huge swarms of stinging, biting, and burrowing insects. But here's the absolute wildest part of all this, the grim physiological reality of how it actually killed a person. Because it wasn't the boats themselves that did it. You see, those massive amounts of forced milk and honey, they caused severe osmotic diarrhea and extreme dehydration. And since the victim was trapped, all that waste just pooled inside the boats. This incredibly festering environment attracted flies that would lay eggs, leading to myiasis, which is a severe maggot infestation. These maggots would essentially eat the victim alive, literally burrowing right into their living tissue and bowels. Ultimately, the victim wouldn't just starve to death. They'd succumb to massive bacterial infections, gangrene, and eventual septic shock. Section 2. The execution of Mithridates. This brings us right to the most famous, and actually practically the only detailed account of this torture ever being used. So meet Mithridates. He was a Persian soldier who fought in the Battle of Cunaxa way back in 401 BCE. Now, during this battle, Mithridates actually delivered the fatal spear thrust to a rebel named Cyrus the Younger. But here's the massive problem. King Artaxerxes II wanted to claim that kill for himself, to boost his own royal prestige. So he rewarded Mithridates, but basically told him, keep your mouth shut. Well, Mithridates made the colossal mistake of drunkenly bragging at a banquet that he, and definitely not the king, had killed Cyrus. By openly undermining the king's absolute divine authority like that, he earned himself a truly horrific death sentence for high treason. And this quote brilliantly illustrates the sheer, unadulterated horror of the event. This comes directly from the ancient Greek biographer Plutarch in his work Life of Artaxerxes. Plutarch spares literally no detail here, painting this incredibly vivid picture of worms and maggots born right out of the victim's own waist, devouring him from the inside out. According to this specific account, Mithridates suffered in this agonizing state for an astonishing 17 days before finally dying. Section 3. Where is the evidence? Now, right as you're feeling fully grossed out by this true crime tale, we need to pause, put our detective hats on for a second, and ask a really critical question. Did this actually even happen? The crucial point here is comparing this myth of Scaphism with actual, verifiable Persian records. Because when we look at real Achaemenid Empire documents and archaeological evidence, things like the famous Behistun inscription, we don't find a single mention of death by boats and insects. Real punishments for high treason back then were all about swift public deterrence. We see historical records of rapid decapitation, impalement, or severe mutilations like severing noses and ears. The Persian legal framework was all about preserving social order through immediate, highly visible examples. It definitely wasn't about secret, 17-day-long protracted insect tortures hidden away on some random pond. Plus, we've got our massive timeline problem here, a 400-year red flag to be exact. Plutarch wrote his sole definitive account of this execution roughly 400 years after the event supposedly took place. To put that into perspective for us today, that's like someone writing the very first account of an event that happened back in the 1600s, but with absolutely zero contemporary evidence to back it up. And the missing link to this 400-year mystery? It's likely an earlier writer named Ctesias of Knidos. He was a 5th century Greek physician who actually worked at the Persian court. But here's the thing. Ctesias is notorious among historians for being an incredibly unreliable witness. He basically wrote literal fake news about the ancient world. He claimed there were dog-headed men, headless people with faces right on their chests, and incredibly, people who used their giant single feet as umbrellas to block the sun. I mean, seriously, try to imagine walking like that. If this guy is where the story of Scaphism originally came from, we absolutely have to question its historical validity. Section 4. Greek bias and propaganda. Let's see how all of this builds into an incredible lesson about ancient geopolitical bias. You see, the Greeks and the Persians, they were bitter rivals. So what we're likely looking at right here is a classic ancient orientalist propaganda playbook. Greek historians would routinely invent or heavily exaggerate tales of Persian cruelty. And why do that? To construct the Persians as these barbaric, savage others. By painting them as cruel despots who tortured people with milk and bugs, the Greeks could highlight their own supposedly contrasting ideals of justice, rationality, and restraint. It created this really powerful moral dichotomy, and it served as a stark warning to Greek citizens about the terrifying perils of unchecked royal power. Section 5. The power of disgust. If Scaphism wasn't actually a real execution, we have to ask why Plutarch used such sickeningly detailed, stomach-churning descriptions in his writing. Well, modern academic analysis actually gives us the answer here. Take this brilliant paper by R. Mormon, for instance. It really helps us understand the whole literary and moral purpose behind this fabricated torture. The authors argue that Plutarch wasn't just trying to gross people out for fun. He was actually using the sensory aesthetics of disgust as an intentional instructional tool for his readers. Plutarch was utilizing this fascinating ancient Greek literary technique called enargeia. Basically, it's the use of highly vivid sensory descriptions designed to mentally transport the reader right into the scene. Plutarch wanted to evoke a bodily, visceral emotional response, pure revulsion. By forcing his readers to physically feel disgust through his words, he was teaching a deep moral lesson. Think about it. In the Persian religious context, milk and honey represented purity and truth. But Mithridates was a liar, so Plutarch uses enargeia to show that a foul, corrupted lie literally produces a foul, rotting, corrupted soul. So, just to summarize the anatomy of this really fascinating historical lie, Scaphism almost certainly wasn't a real historical punishment. There is absolutely zero independent contemporary Persian evidence that it ever actually happened. Furthermore, historians point out that it's just mechanically and biologically implausible as a standardized execution method. Instead, it's rooted entirely in anti-Persian Greek bias, deliberately designed by writers like Plutarch as a potent literary tool. It was enargeia in action, a really clever way to manipulate human disgust for moral instruction and political propaganda. It's crazy to think that Scaphism still regularly goes viral today as a terrifying historical fact. But in reality, it's just a myth built on ancient political bias. So it begs a really fascinating question. If a 2,000-year-old lie can still easily fool modern true crime podcasts today, what other history are we blindly accepting simply because it makes for a good story? Thank you so much for exploring this with me today.